Hello, adventurers. My name's Tyler.
And I'm Richard.
On today's episode, we'll be discussing the benefits of crafting your own world and some tips to make it happen. Welcome to True Strike.
Welcome back to the show. Today we are talking about world building. That's right. We're going to talk about creating a world that is believable and lived in and just fun to be in for your players.
And not just from scratch, we're also going to be discussing, and I think right off the jump, really, about fleshing out some of these pre-made worlds, modules, and things like that. We're talking Faerun and the Sword Coast. We're talking, your Exandrias and maybe even your Fantasy Highs and in Calorum, and who knows, all these fan favorite worlds maybe you've heard about in podcast or read about in your Dungeons & Dragons modules, or perhaps other game worlds, other systems.
Yeah, world building doesn't have to be homebrew, which is what I think a lot of people think of when they first think of world building. So
I know I did.
Yeah, when I first pitched this this show premise to you, I think that's what you first said, which was homebrew. And yeah, it does. That's the next thing that we're going to talk about is world building and homebrew. But world building doesn't just have to be homebrew. World building is just that. It is fleshing out everything that's going on around your players. And this can go right into any pre-made module or any pre-existing world, because not every module is created equal, so not all of them have a world to build on. Good example for that was what we discussed last episode with Epic Encounters. So Epic Encounters is, if you haven't listened to that, go listen to that first and then come back here and you'll realize that, one of the things we mentioned in there is Epic Encounters is an encounter-based not a module, but an encounter-based set. So they give you encounters, battles that you go through, and those battles are not very fleshed out world-wise.
But they are epic.
They give you maps, they give you epic creatures to battle and an epic boss to battle. But if you want something a little bit more in-depth for your players, you're going to have to do a little bit of world building.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then you have things like, the actual starter packs or actual modules, which one will argue has a built world. Right?
Yes, it's an easy argument to make.
Yeah, so that's what you're buying that for, so you don't have to build a world. And it is true. So you can go out and you can buy, the Stormwreck Isle, or you can buy Fendelver, or you can go even to the bigger modules like Curse of Strahd and everything like that.
Rime of the Frost Maiden.
Rime of the Frost Maiden, yeah. So these are all worlds that are there for you to play in that are already very well established and they're already out there. But world building doesn't necessarily mean having to think of all those things. World building can be an approach to how you present these materials to your players. So what that kind of means, at least to me, and this maybe might differ to you or Tyler here, is making sure your world feels believable and lived in. So I can have my module here in front of me that tells me everything about this area, the 10 towns that I'm in. And it's going to give me all of the characters, right, that are inside this town. So if I read this to you and I'm like, oh, okay, this is your first time in the town. You walk in and there's Jim Bob. He's the local drunk. He's walking up the street and he says, hey, how you doing? Welcome to the 10 towns. And then you have your interaction with him. And they might give you a lot of details about Jim Bob. They might not give you very many details about Jim Bob. But this is a chance for world building if there isn't a whole lot of details there. And maybe there are some details there, but they don't lend to your storytelling of this current situation. So world building in this sense could be that specific character and his, backstory. However, it may be changed to kind of fit him a little bit more in with the characters in your campaign, like maybe tying into backstory and lore that they have that's pre-established or something like that. And then also the motivations of this character, why he's, walking up to them and why he's specifically targeting that one party member and, coming up to talk to them. So that's one good example of how you can take something that might pre-exist in a module and build upon it to make that scenario more believable.
Yeah, and that's a good one to bring up, too, the idea of this character coming up, this Jim Bob. Because you're most likely lucky if you get a image for this Jim Bob. If he's not a main reoccurring NPC for story reasons, maybe the game gives you a name. Maybe it gives you, use the veteran stat block for Jim Bob. Really, you're lucky if you get an image, because then you at least have hair color and maybe a face to go by, and then outside of that. But if you take the time and you flesh out this character in his motivations, his background. Oh, he's drinking. Why is he drinking? Did he just lose a family member? Has he always been a drunk? Is he just down on his luck currently? You can flesh this out. You can maybe even get him back on his feet. You can just kind of coexist with Jim Bob the drunk, and maybe he's just a really nice guy who really likes to drink, and that's okay. But if you establish that going into the situation, the opportunities present themselves more frequently and organically to your players if they start up a conversation with this Jim Bob, and that's super cool. I like it.
Yeah, and it if you go even further back in the True Strike podcast lore, you'll find an episode on AI, which means that if you really want to get really weird and crafty, you can ask the AI for a little bit of backstory on Jim Bob and being a drunk and how he got there.
That is if you're trying to flesh this character out and you just don't want to really put in as much of the work yourself.
Yeah.
AI is a tool. The chat GPTs or the bards of the world can be there to help you out in creating, some backstory extra quickly.
Yeah. That's if you want something super quick and you don't want to spend a whole lot of time fleshing something like that out.
Which, to be fair, if you're going to go through and like really do this to all the NPCs of Icewind Dale,
every single NPC
maybe you're
is
gonna
going to have
to
its
do
own
this.
file folder. So we're going to have to pull that out and cross-reference it.
So I think that's actually a good point to bring up. And how much do you think? Where do you draw the line on this? Now, let's stick with Icewind Dale, and you've got the 10 towns. Are you looking for every named NPC in the module and just fleshing them out? Or are you thinking like, okay, well, this town would definitely have at least 50 people who live here. Do I need names and backgrounds for everybody, even like surface level?
Of them. No, I think it's on a case-to-case basis, right? Okay. Because I think that it's more like one of the things that you're going to do if you're running a module, right, is you are going to do a little bit of research. You're going to read ahead, right? So you're going to look at a town that, your players are going to be going into. And not every town is going to be as flush with detail as, like the main set pieces, right? So I think that this is a good way for you to look at a world and recognize that maybe it's not as filled as it could be. Right.
Yeah.
So you're looking at this next town that they're going into, and you read the description of that town, and you see that, yeah, it is a town, but my players are going to be super bored here, and this is a very 2D version of a town. So they're going to come in here, and they're going to ask to look around. My only response is going to be like, "Yep, it's a town. There's a tavern. It's right there. A dwarf owns it. They have rooms. They're a golden knight." And then, yeah.
Now, to be fair, you really sound like a first-time dungeon master in this situation, which is okay. It's all right to run a game like that if maybe you don't really know this module as well as you could have. But to be fair to the module, it's going to give you more information than you just presented to me, the player, out of the book.
Yes, so there will be some more detail there, yeah.
You're at least going to know this tavern. You're probably going to have an idea of what it looks like. There's usually a gray little blurb of, as you turn the icy street of Icewind Dale, you notice a lantern blowing slightly in the wind and a sign that's hanging slightly off the chain. The Icewind Lodge. Stepping inside, there's a dwarf missing a leg and a scruffy black beard, and he looks at you while cleaning out a glass and says, "Cold outside." Ain't it? And, you maybe will get something like that. Maybe, and they're like, all right, Blackbeard the dwarf man has the stat block listed here. Or maybe it's generic stat block of, town folk, whatever. It's got something.
Yeah, but not all of them are that detailed, though. Like, if you're looking at some of the other starter sets, like
Depends on the point of interest.
well, that's what I'm saying. Like one of the first ones that I ran for my daughter was the mines, right?
Oh yeah,
And
which is typically thought of as a very good starter set.
yeah, which is a very good starter set. And I'm not knocking it and saying that it's not a good starter set, but some of the basic descriptions, right, of some of the places that you go, some of the towns that you enter, and some of the buildings that you enter, I found very lacking. Right. So I did find myself having to write a little bit more when running that campaign for her, and putting a little bit more character into the characters that were there. Because they didn't really have much, especially when it came to like some of the sidekicks.
Sure.
You had a very 2D kind of support character that didn't really have a lot going on for it. I mean, there were obvious descriptors there and everything like that, but on base surface level, it felt very surface level. That's exactly what I could say. So that was a good example to me as a place that I could insert a little bit more, right, to kind of help make it feel more immersive, right? Because that's what I found was lacking in certain parts of that, which was the immersion, right? I kind of started to feel a little bit of a separation in what some of the book was telling me to describe and giving me to give to the player. I felt could have been a little bit more detailed and a little bit more fleshed out. And that goes for characters, but then also environments, like you said, because what you just described was a very detailed description of an inn, and I automatically now have a very good picture of that in my head.
And that's just a front to the place that didn't tell you anything about the the color of the wood or the quality or the state of what it's in right now. That didn't mention the fact that the wind is blowing and it's so cold that your facial hair is actually starting to ice over underneath your nose from your breath, condensating on your mustache and turning into ice right in front of you. That's all stuff that can be thrown in there too, and points from like your dungeon master filling in some context. Yes, like you're getting at.
Yeah.
Now, something I have noticed a lot with these and this is just Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition that I'm referencing. I know this probably affects other games and stuff too. 5th edition modules vary wildly from the amount of information it gives you out of the book. You could have a Waterdeep dragon heist that is detailed to not only the characters you're going to meet and the environments and the flow of the storyline and different options depending on the season the game takes place in. Or you could have a Strixhaven where they're like, it's a magic school. You go to classes, have fun, and you're like, ah!
Yeah, I remember the first time that I read the Strixhaven book, and I was all like, my God, to run this I'm going to have this massive tomb of backstory and information. Like it's a very fleshed out world. Don't get me wrong. Strixhaven is an amazing world, and it sounds great. It sounds super fun. Haven't run it yet. Don't know when I will run it.
At what point would you feel comfortable?
But that's the thing is that I know that if I run Strixhaven, it's going to take some work. Like it is a very interesting world, but if you've read the book, you'll understand how much they can give you and how little it is.
Yeah.
Right? There's so much there, but then when it comes to actually building this lived world, it does require a lot of work, I believe, to make something that your players are going to really engage with and want to participate in and make it feel right.
Yeah. Now, is that just a symptom of the fact that Strixhaven isn't an environment that we get to visit often? So they felt like they had to kind of come at this book, not only with a story like module in mind, but also giving you, species and items and things to play with as well. And they kind of have to be a little open-ended so that you can use it as a reference for multiple campaigns going forward, because who knows when we're getting another Strixhaven book.
Yeah, I think it's partly that, and I also think that it has something to do with the source material too, because they're also, you have to remember, Strixhaven Academy is a tie-in to another branding being Magic the Gathering.
Correct.
Which means that they also had probably some bullet points that they had to hit as far as like references.
Yeah,
right?
no, and
So we've got to hit these schools of magic.
It's very fair.
Yeah, and we have to hit sometimes these special characters that are going to be there for people that are cross continuity. Right. So we've got to, we're trying to bring this Magic the Gathering to the D&D people, and we want to catch the people that are already in the Magic the Gathering space. We want to have that crossover. So I think it's a little bit of that and a little bit of, like what you said, which was them having to make it open-ended enough to where you can make it work for you.
Right. So to me, this seems like the perfect example of why using world building tips is important, because you're getting this chunk of text and you're trying to digest it as well as you can, but there's a lot of bits you're going to have to flesh out, or at least connect dots together to create like a coherent story.
Yeah.
Whereas your Rhymes of the Frost Maiden, you're looking at Icewind Dale as a place on Faerun, and you know where it's located. Your players probably are familiar with the location because so many other campaigns and modules take place on the same area, even homebrew campaigns, because it's an area we're all familiar with. And then you're like, all right, I'm familiar with the area. Let me just zoom in, enhance at the very top of the map up here. All right, guys, we're here for the whole game. Now we got to learn these towns, all 10 of them. We got to learn this, we got to learn this mountaintop, and we're pretty much good to go. And then after that, you're learning people. And even then, if you look to your left, it's snow, and if you look to your right, it's ice. And you've kind of really got the picture. You don't even necessarily have to describe the scene in great detail every town after town after town, unless there's different construction methods and stuff like that. Whereas if you and me were to play Strixhaven right now and we walk into the school, I am picturing Harry Potter until you tell me otherwise.
Yeah.
And if I'm wrong, I don't know I'm wrong until you completely explain this new environment to me.
Yeah, and how wrong you are, because it's insane. Like,
See?
each individual school and area has its own, like, completely unique layout.
Nope, it's Hogwarts, right?
And everything. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. But like I said, they do go into quite a bit of detail. They do give you a lot. But I'm really glad you brought up Strixhaven, because even when I was doing notes for this, I didn't even, that was, like further back in my mind. I was, thinking more along the lines of the starter modules and stuff like that I had already done stuff with.
Yeah.
Whereas Strixhaven, I just read the book, never actually run it. But the reason why I haven't run it is because of the world building.
Right.
Because like at the time when I picked up that book and I really did want to run it for you guys, I read it and was immediately intimidated by the amount of world building that was going to be necessary.
I remember you mentioning that.
Yeah. And that was my biggest fear. Like when I bought the book, I was like, oh, this is amazing. It's great. But man, is it going to require a lot of work. And it even still right now, I would really love to run it. And I do have some bare bones for stuff that's already written for what I would want to run and how I would want to present it. But it still requires a lot. Like, it's going to need even more before it's ready to play.
And I can't wait. I'm honest to goodness so excited to play this one day. I've actually transitioned through multiple characters like that are going to be the character I use from this game, and I'm wondering where I'm going to land by the time we actually start.
By the time it actually starts, yeah.
So what edition of Dungeons & Dragons will we be playing?
Yeah, exactly.
So
we're going to be in our Ready Player One suits by the time we're ready to go to Strixhaven Academy.
I load in and it's just in front of me, and you're like, if you look to your left, you see Professor TikTok. And I'm like, oh, cool. And you're like, yeah, just look at him. I got to describe him. Like,
he's right there. Just look
right
at
there.
him. Yeah.
But then a dragon. I'm like, ah! Yeah, so I'm stoked about it. But I completely understand that would be the daunting task of even running this game. And that's not even creating it from scratch. That's all of these elements being presented to you within a book.
Yeah.
And even then, oof, right? Like, you got so much there. Now, you got to take a step back. Let's say I'm your player. Oh, you get your players on this side of the table, right? We don't have expectations necessarily other than Harry Potter. And even if we've read the book, it's your world. You don't have to follow every single guideline in that book. You take everything you want. But you still have to flesh everything out in your own way. What are these characters, these professors, these other students? Oh my gosh, the idea of like Magic School sounds like a very social game. It's not just a combat simulator. This isn't a dungeon dive. So, okay, well, dungeon crawl, maybe you don't have to build out as much. because you just keep going down. Do you want to go left? Do you want to go
Yeah.
right? Do you want to look for traps? You don't? Okay, guess what? A trap. Ah, didn't see that coming, did you? And then there's a boss battle, and then maybe you keep going. It's Diablo in that sense. But Magic School, are we even going to have a combat day one? And if we do, is it a training situation where I'm standing on one side of a long table and someone else is standing on the other side of a long table, and he's casting Firebolt at me while I'm trying to get close enough to punch him with my flurry of blows? Like, how are we doing this? But that's what I'm picturing. And then I'm creating rivalries with other students, maybe within my own party. I don't know. These are all off my brain and my questions as the player, not knowing the world you've built for us. And if it's come from the book, great. Maybe that was information you didn't have to come up with because the book provided it to you. But if you came up with it out of your own brain pan, then wow, I that's awesome. I'm excited to experience it. But also, wow, that sounds like a lot of work.
Yeah, no, it definitely would be. And there, in the first draft of this written school year, there was a combat.
See?
Almost on like day 2, actually. Yeah, I had a little encounter in a coffee shop with
Nice.
with another student's experiment gone awry.
Ooh, I like it.
Yeah, so it was going to be a fun little encounter, and may still be. I don't know. We'll have to see if we keep
And
with
that
it.
seems like a good low stake combat.
Yes, no, exactly. But again, it was, and really that portion was a really good example of world building because it was going to be a way for me to introduce essentially a whole section of classroom studies and dynamics, right? Because now you are seeing a group of students and you're seeing like high level kind of, not high level, but mid-level experimentation and how it can be bad, right? And how things can go wrong. And it was kind of going to be an opener into like a whole subplot essentially.
Ooh,
And
I
this
love
was
it.
all stuff that is not in the actual module itself.
See?
Right. So this was all stuff that I just started thinking about on the fly because the module itself is, and you've probably read the reviews, and if you haven't, you should go take a look at them if you're interested in Strixhaven review, isn't super in depth. So it is a very bare bones, and people have recognized this and talked about it and everything like that. It does require a little bit more work than your average campaign. So I saw that right off the jump, and immediately when I started writing for it and started doing stuff, I started trying to compensate for that, which is the whole point of this whole thing, which is talking about building out a world to make it feel more lived in and more realistic for your characters.
And one of the more recent examples of this that I've seen recently where the community has kind of reached out and been like, yo, where's the meat? Where's the beef? Right? Is Spelljammer.
Yeah.
We got a 3-book set for this. And yet, where's the beef? The people are getting this and they're like, okay, you've got bones of a story here. You've got a giant fixation on, ship to ship combat and stuff like that. Like to the point where they sold like larger scale battle maps in Wild Space with, scaled down ships and stuff. So you could actually have these big, like, tactical ship battles.
These epic ship battles.
But the rule set for ship to ship combat was very bare bones. Why that ship to ship combat could have been its own book.
Yeah.
Like if you were going to make such a big focus on this, why not? Why leave that to the player? And, granted, we're not owed anything. I mean, other than the fact that they asked for a certain amount of money, and as enjoyers of the content, we provided the money in exchange for the product. It's okay. Your feelings are valid to be disappointed. But it being Dungeons & Dragons and that what it is, I kind of just accept at this point that maybe I'm going to have to do at least half the work myself, even when I'm buying a module.
Yeah.
But maybe that's wrong. Maybe I should just expect to buy a book, open it up as a first-time DM, be able to run something, especially when the set I'm buying comes with 3 friggin' books. But that wasn't the case for this. This was mostly you learning about the GIF and your Dodozi and your Thrycreen and stuff like that, and you've got your cool species and a little bit of how Wild Space works, and a little bit of a story to get you started into Wild Space. The Spelljammer set actually reminds me more of a Minds of Foundelver than an actual module, in that it just kind of gets you going.
Yeah, especially compared to some of the more popular modules that are out and that have been released. It did feel a lot lacking when you compare it to others, especially when it comes to a world that you can drop your players into and play in.
Yeah, like a look at Curse of Strahd. It's a good example. You've got a campaign that is almost entirely set within the mist of Barovia and Ravenloft, and it gives you so much. It gives you a lot of detail in characters and the land and motivations and your magic items and everything, and it's a fantastic campaign out of the book. However, supplemented with extra material from our Curse of Strahd, with your Manny mod and your Dragna Carta and your Lunchbox heroes and stuff like that, you can really flesh out these characters and make this world feel lived in. The amount of stuff that I have already changed, either suggested by these content creators or stuff I came up with myself, and it's definitely been a combination of both. But all of those are on the back of what is essentially a very well fleshed out module, and a great example of what I wish all of them would be. It's just not the case.
Yeah. And that's why it's important to be able to look at something like Spelljammer or Strixhaven or even Strahd and be able to see what you feel are the weak points and be able to make them stronger, right? So you can come in and you can fill in those gaps, which anybody that's running a game automatically starts to try and fill in gaps. It's just kind of like what you do, especially when you're trying to tailor a story for your specific characters, right? Because you have somebody that is coming in that has this idea of the character that they want to play, and they already have this established story, right? So they have their own fleshed out backstory and everything like that. And to be able to use that and essentially apply it into your existing module to make them feel like they're part of it is something that everybody is pretty much doing in one way, shape, or another. So it's all part of that same thing, which is using those stories and helping them kind of fit in, right, to make sure that it does feel realistic, because it's real easy for somebody to just come up with a character that they drop into a game, but in order to make that character feel like he's, you know, gonna be there, they're gonna be there and actually have effect or change or belonging to that world, is gonna require some insertion on your behalf.
The best example of this I can think off the top of my head would be playing in Garrett's campaign of running, Rime of the Frostmaiden. I had my character Rudolph Deshar, who was looking for the killer of his uncle. Short version of all this. And out the gate, he gave me a name. He said, "You're looking for this guy. You picked up some information." And my quest at the beginning was, all right, where's this guy at? Find this guy, talk to him. And it kind of, it turned out he wasn't actually a bad guy, but he gave me some information on looking for this white hand guy. Lo and behold, later on in the campaign, where we're all at a prison and we're all going in, they're like, "Yo, you can't bring some weaponry in." And I'm like, "I'm not leaving this sword behind, for story reasons." And they're like, "Well, you can't come in." I'm like, "All right, I'll wait here." Everyone else goes in, and I'm sitting there in the waiting room, and lo and behold, guess who walks in? Because he frequently visits this prison. Did I know he was going to walk in while I was sitting in the waiting room? No. I don't even know if our dungeon master did. However, it was amazing. And I remember stepping outside and feeling shaky IRL that this was about to go down and I was probably going to die. And it was awesome. And it led to further conflicts and stuff later on in the story. And it was something where my character was enveloped in the world with not actually a ton of work from a dungeon master's perspective, I don't think.
Yeah.
Because all he had to do was, he didn't have to change any of the environments or, too many characters or motivations or anything. He just added an additional NPC that walked into a prison. And I was like, My entire life's goal.
Everything is now in front of me.
All right, guys. BRB. And that mattered so much because as the rest of the players were progressing the storyline, I was progressing my storyline. And this is the moment where I was truly a part of the world and nothing else mattered except for this moment. And that's awesome. And like I said, he didn't have to really go out of his way to be like, oh yeah, the mayor of Brinshanda, is related to your niece, and you should go follow this quest line to do whatever. I was just sitting in a waiting room, y'all, and it was everything. It was super cool, and it came back later, and these are all the things you remember, and it completely evolved my character from losing that battle. My character always drank a lot, and then after the battle, I drank really heavy, and then after that last night of like binge drinking, I sobered up. And I really started taking things extra seriously. And it completely changed the personality of my character one way or another. And that was neat.
Yeah. It was really cool. It was a very fun moment, and it actually changed the encounter inside of the prison as well.
Oh, yeah. Good point.
Because it made me do something that I probably wouldn't have done otherwise, which was kind of sort of help a prisoner. That was just in service to get me out of the prison to try and assist you, which was an interesting situation to be put in.
Which you knew about my situation because we had a psychic link via your character's telepathy and stuff.
Yep. Yeah.
So
yeah, it was interesting because it made everything happen that evening a lot more like involved and different than it probably would have played out.
We made desperate decisions.
Yes. Yeah. Which was a lot of fun for everybody involved.
Yeah. That's what world building gets you. It could have just been the written end book. We walk in to Revel's End. We go in. There's an issue with the prisoners. There's a riot. They break out, etc., etc. We do what we got to do, and we leave.
Yeah.
Point A, point B. But no. Actual story consequences and stuff came up. First, a slight alteration and tie-in to a single character's backstory. And it changed the encounter for everyone. That's all it takes.
Yeah. Now that's world building as pertains to modules, which, like I said, isn't really the first thing that everybody thinks of. The first thing that everybody usually thinks of when you say world building is homebrew, which is a whole nother subject because not everybody has homebrewed a world. A lot of people that are DMs are module DMs. So they come in and they just play modules, right? Or they just play epic encounters.
Or that's at least where you start.
Or that's where they start. But
which is good.
A lot of people do start thinking about their own world, like where they want to be and what they want to base things on. And because everybody's got that ideal in the back of their head of like, this is the campaign that I want to run.
Yeah.
And it's probably not something that somebody has already written down somewhere, which means you're going to have to write it yourself, which is where world building really goes into overdrive,
which is where World Anvil comes in handy.
Yeah. Because now you have to think of everything, right? So this is where world building really hits its stride because you start off from scratch because you are legit building the world that you want to see. So you have to decide what kind of world that you want to build. Like, are you playing in a steampunk kind of a world, right? So you're going to have to build based on that kind of technology. Are you playing in high fantasy that's like Lord of the Rings style or just general fantasy, or you're playing, real world something or alternate realities or gothic horror, right? So you kind of got to decide what your world is going to be.
And you say, you mentioned these examples and we talk about building from scratch. It's totally okay. Don't let anyone on the internet tell you otherwise to take inspiration from things.
Oh, of
if
course.
you take a dash of Lord of the Rings because you like the way that their elves are kind of like a little high and mighty and they're so graceful and beautiful all the time, and you like that about elves, or the way the dwarves and the mines and these fantasy tropes and stuff like that are, for the most part, that a lot of that comes from things like Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, they're tropes for a reason.
If you make your own magical school, maybe Harry Potter's your big inspiration. Don't make it Hogwarts, but you can have wizards and witches and warlocks casting spells with wands. Like, No one's going to be like, hey, wands.
Yeah.
That's from that one book.
Wands and books. Hey, now. We're
Yeah,
getting...
deliver mail with the slowest flying creature. I know that one.
Yeah, I want my mail completely dependent on a bird.
You can teleport from A to B with a fireplace. Send it with a bird.
Yeah.
It'll be there eventually, but it'll be really quiet when it gets there.
Yeah, sure.
That's the biggest issue. Our old mail system used to be incredibly loud.
But yeah, everybody takes inspiration from something. So, that's one really big part of world building when you're doing your own homebrew is figuring out what your inspirations are and what your end result is going to be.
What world would you want to play in? I think is a big thing.
Yeah.
Especially, if you're going to take the time to literally put in hours of your own free time. Like, no one's playing this at the moment. You're just sitting there in a room or in your own brain, spacing out or driving or whatever, and you're coming up with all the environment and stuff like that for this world. Make it something you enjoy above anything else. That way you can be passionate about it when you pitch it to your players.
Yeah, it's going to make it a lot easier for you to design too if you are thinking about actively and building something that is already at the forefront of your mind. Because if you're just trying to shoehorn in a bunch of like memes or just weird references and stuff like that, and it's not something that you really enjoy, it's not going to feel real, right? Because it's going to feel like you are doing that. You're just shoehorning stuff in there. So it's really important that you decide what you want to do and make sure that you're staying true to what your vision is, because if it's not something that you enjoy and something that you want to play in, then it's going to show in your work. Right?
Yeah. Now, like, for example, my wife is a giant fan of the Vampire Diaries. I'm not going to make a homebrew world that is modern day setting with vampire and werewolf people, even though that could be a cool one shot. But my interests fall into the fantasy camp. So something like the Curse of Strahd is right up my alley in a good middle ground where I can do the spooky vampires and stuff, but with that fantasy flair that I am interested in personally. Now, if I'm going to create a world from scratch, I might not even touch vampires and stuff. That's not my, big thing. But best be sure it's going to be fantasy, at least for me. But, I know at least a couple of our friends or, colleagues, stuff like that, would lean more towards sci-fi or altered American history.
Yeah.
Or it could be all kinds of things. And that's okay. And it doesn't have to be Dungeons & Dragons. It could be any rule system that you prefer. It could be your Monster of the Week. It could be your Warhammers and things like that. Cthulhu? There's lots of good systems out there. Even Pathfinder, 2nd edition, stuff like that. Whatever you prefer. The idea is just come up with a world you enjoy. Think out the gate what rule system you want it to be based in, because that's going to change some of your decisions, especially if it's something like Cthulhu, which is, threats are significantly more serious than if it's Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Because if I take a wound in Cthulhu, I might just be dead.
Yeah, you might just be done.
And if I take that in Dungeons & Dragons, I'll sleep it off.
Yeah.
So that's big out the gate, too, to know that.
Yeah. So once you have your setting and the kind of world that you want to be in, the next thing you need to decide is what this world is going to look like.
Ooh, big one.
So that's a huge one, which I refer to as geography. So this is, what does your world look like? Or sometimes even just area, because world building doesn't have to be the entire planet. Right. So I'm homebrewing this world. I'm using air quotes that you can't see. I'm not necessarily going to write the entire planet from pole to pole. Can I do that? 100%. Yeah. I could sit there and I could write a George R.R. Martin epic that entails the entire planet from one side to the other, time zone to time zone. But it doesn't have to be that. It can just be a generalized area. So like, look at something like the Sword Coast, right? So I could write something very similar to the Sword Coast, and then just keep it to that general area. I can just world build for that specific area for my needs for what we're currently doing. And if I want to expand upon it, then I expand upon it.
Barovia, incredibly small. Literally enclosed area that you cannot escape from. And it's very, very dense. It's very well fleshed out for being such a small area. And that's okay.
Yeah, that's
It's in
perfectly
its own
fine. Yeah.
demiplane, and that contains, you're like, oh, this is why you can't leave, because it's in its own plane of existence. Totally fine. You look at my homebrew world that eventually we will touch, Talos, and the very first thing I thought of was the name. And then I did think of, what does the planet look like as a whole? This is where we ended up with the suns on each pole.
Yeah.
And, the world, for reasons, it's not just being burned to a crisp, for reasons that, you get to in game, of course. But because of this, it's basically scorched deserts on both ends of the planet. But around the ring, you have this tundra of icy terrain all the way around, like an Oreo cookie. And, well, guess what? The suns don't move. The planet spins between the middle, and the icy regions never see sunlight. Well, guess what you're going to find in these areas? Terrible monstrosities that live in the darkness all the time. So the colder it gets, the scarier the bad guys get. And, somewhere in the middle, you get your happy median with, like, your jungly areas and stuff like that. And the poles, you've got your desert, your wastelands, your stuff like that. Maybe the least fortunate human beings live there with, like, flora and fauna that have learned to survive off dust and just nothing except imported resources and things like that. And this is all information that you just start to kind of it flows out of you while you're thinking about, I have a circle, and on each side of those circle are two other circles.
Yeah.
Those two circles are suns. What would happen to the planet if that was the case? And then now you've got how would your civilizations be laid out? What do they look like? What is
Yeah, where do people live? Where do they congregate? Yeah. What are the zones, essentially?
Right. And depending on these zones, you have people that are hunting and foraging. Like, what does the hierarchy look like here? Your governments, your structures, and what kind of building materials are available to them depending where they live. That's going to change the layout of villages and towns and cities. And all of that comes from, what does my area look like?
Yeah. And that can be huge. And you've taken it to the extreme example, as in, like, I'm visualizing a whole planet with two suns, and then going from there, how does that affect everything? Mm-hmm. And that's the big picture. But you can macro that into a single area and say, like, okay, well, here we have this area of this part of a world where there's a massive volcano, because I like that volcano set piece. And then it's an active volcano. And then how does that active volcano change the area that's around it, where the people can live now, because there's an active volcano that's a threat. Right. Say it's erupted a couple of times. If is there a jungle nearby? Is it, scorched earth nearby, and then it, goes into jungle where people might be living there. There could be an inactive volcano. There's a giant crater lake. And, what kind of, scenarios do you have surrounding that? Who is going to live around this crater lake? Is it going to be wildlife? Is it going to be people? Because that lake is, full of abundant resources and everything like that. So coming up with your geography is the really huge point to start to even flesh out your world. Yeah. Because it's going to naturally give you all these ideas of how you're going to play the rest of the world out. Because once you start thinking about the way things look, it's a real easy jump to think about the way things live. Like, who lives Absolutely. Where and how they live. So that is, like, one of the big things is when you're thinking about this world, what's it look like? And then from there, stuff will start to fall into place as far as, how everything is laid out. So geography is a big one. But then once you have that, now you have people.
Yes.
So once you have people and you understand where they live in the geography, why they live in the geography, now you have to figure out what else is going on with these people.
Yeah. What are they doing?
Yeah.
What's their day-to-day? Do they have a village leader? Do they have a government, a parliament? Like, what does this look like? Especially, you're talking big picture again. If it's the whole world, maybe you do have to dive in and figure this out for all these different sections. If it's just a island that is actually a inactive volcano currently, maybe the rest of the earth has already been flooded. We're talking Waterworld situation here, and the majority of civilization is living on this inactive volcano, but lo and behold, it starts to erupt and people have to leave. And after they leave, maybe they find different little mini islands they didn't know existed that different civilizations live on, and what do those different groups live like, and how are they ruled, and do you find a group of cannibals and maybe a group that's actually built up using different materials they were able to pull from the ocean, like constructed castles and walls, and some cool scenarios here. There's a lot you can go on just off very little.
Yeah, and all this helps you to generate all this stuff to make it feel like a lived-in world.
Mm-hmm.
Because like you said, now you have the reasons why people live in these areas, and now you have microcosms of governments or faction or politics or even religion.
Yes, that's a big one.
Whether or not they're going to be influenced by a greater power, or if they're sequestered and they're all alone. But now you're building all these communities, which makes it real easy for you to now have a world that exists on its own without the player agency yet.
Yeah.
So now you're already almost there, because you have a world, you have inhabitants of this world, and then you have the layout of the inner social workings of all these people,
mm-hmm.
right? So you have all this cool information of how this world is already working, and it's almost already working.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, maybe, you is your world going to have religion? Is it not going to have religion? That's a decision.
That's a big one. Yeah.
Now, is one of your players, maybe once you get towards the finish line, is one of your players a cleric?
Yeah.
At that point, okay, maybe you put some more detail into religion than you originally had planned out. Maybe your team doesn't have a cleric. You can leave that vague. Who's going to be asking to speak to their god if none of them
have a god?
Yeah, none of them really focus in on that. Paladin can just be a paladin, like, oh, yeah, it's your homebrew world. Maybe you don't have Bahamut there. Maybe you have Gregory. And, he's like, oh, Gregory, I get my strength from. I don't know, maybe him and Gregory chill. Maybe they talk every once in a while. Maybe they never really dive into that at all. But if you look at Evelyn from, Waffle Crew or Acquisitions Incorporated, or her and Lathander are tight. You gotta really have this stuff figured out the gate. Or maybe you just let the player kind of like come up with all that themselves and you just let it roll. That's up to you. It's your world. So whatever you want to do. But yeah, religion's a fun one, I think. I wouldn't go crazy with it unless you really want to. You want to come up with some cool religious lore and background and have the gods influence the land and the world and stuff like that. Or if they've been kind of, hands off. You look at something like Matt Mercer's Exandria, and the deities and the religion there it's like the reason things are the way they are. That's important. But that was a choice he made.
Yeah. I mean, you can do the same thing with politics too, because
100%.
Your politics, yeah, exactly. Your politics can be this heavy-handed thing because the politics can be incredibly overreaching.
Yes.
Right. So you can have an entire world that is under the thumb of one ruling govern. Right. So it's like you can have it that in depth, or you can have all these little sequestered areas that are like not in super contact with each other, that have their own microcosm governments essentially.
That's your Strahd.
Yeah.
Strahd is your ruler of Barovia.
Yeah, he's the one that's there lording over everything.
Yes.
Literally.
And yeah, that's the government of Barovia.
Yeah.
And is there anyone above, the person ruling that person? Maybe. That's up to you to decide as the dungeon master, the creator of this homebrew world. You don't have to go crazy with your ladder of power. But you can.
Yeah, but you can. And that's another decision that you'll have to make once you get to that point, is how in depth do you want to go on this? Do you want to go full hog on the politics and the religion? Do you want to go for one or the other? Or do you not want to touch either one of those, and you kind of just want to let the world kind of exist hands-off-ish? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, you have to then decide how you want to handle that kind of stuff.
Right. That's some of the best parts, I think, of creating your own world. Is you're constrained by nothing. It's your world.
Yeah, it's your world. It's your creative freedom.
This is the coolest thing to me, is at that point, if you so allow it, can your players affect the world? Can they change things permanently?
Yeah, and I think that's the next big thing, is figuring out how much you want your players to change that world. How set in stone are these things? And that will, kind of lead you to decide what's going to happen with that world. Because say you go heavy on the government angle, like Strahd, who is the lord of the land and ruling over everything.
Mm-hmm.
Now you have to decide, is this something that my players can overcome? Right. Is that the goal? Is now that going to be the goal, that they have to overcome this ruling, governing, entity, right?
Yeah.
Or is that something that is not going to be attainable? So is the government that you set in place just this very stringent rules and regulations that keep things in a nice, orderly fashion that they're not going to really be able to have any effect on? Right. So that's where you got to make that choice of how much change and how much player agency you're going to give them.
Right.
What are you going to allow them to do to your world?
Yeah.
Is it deities, or do you have massive deities? Can they fight it?
Right. Now, and this is one of this big things with the modules. Modules, feel free to change anything you want. You're the dungeon master, etc. If this is your world, you have no reason, and it's other than your choice, no reason not to fully incorporate your characters into this world for any number of reasons.
Oh yeah.
It could just be that, your team's human fighter grew up, as the son of a couple of bread makers. And one day, he was supposed to take over, the parents' shop, and there was a horrible fire, and it's because a warlord from the town next door moved in and was taken over. And well, guess what? You're going after that warlord when you get bigger and stronger and learn how to wield a sword and not just bake bread. You can do that. You can actually have that city. You could revisit that, and people there can know him. They can know this character, and I'm so sorry for what happened to your parents and stuff. You seem like you grew up well though, and I grew up tough, and you can really throw a lot of sin. And to Loss, this is actually a mix of a couple of those things. And you know this, but for the podcast, the deities, the gods, are not a thing that's just, religion, right? I know religion. Yeah, of course gods are real. Gods are like you and me, bruh. They're just straight up on the street. They live in different areas around the world, and they mingle with the people. That's how it is. People pray to them. People worship them. People canoodle with them. This is a thing. The gods are undeniably a thing.
There.
They are there. You're like, I don't believe in you. They're like eating a turkey leg. You're like, okay,
all right, whatever.
Yeah, and can gods walk through and wipe a city off the map at the snap of their finger? Possibly. They're gods.
Yeah.
and you, with that sense, like, okay, well, do we ever have to fight these people? Are we allies with these people? Does your character draw power from them? Does your character have a grudge against them? These are things. This is a very like, the boy is like, oh, I want to take down Homelander. Well, how do you take down a god, essentially?
Yeah.
Like, I'm just a person. How do I take down Superman? And, maybe that, you're figuring out how to do that. Or, oh, no, Superman's our hero. I want to work with Superman to create a better place for everyone. You can do that. These are different opportunities and paths and choices you have to make. And it's your world. How do you want to handle this situation? And all of that comes from saying, yeah, I want my gods to be on like the planet. I want them to be people. Boom. You have all these avenues you can take.
Yeah, and now you have all these avenues and options of what's going to happen in your world and what your players are going to do. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or you can go the exact opposite of it, which in talking on this, I had a great idea for a world where religion doesn't exist. Right. So you have no religion.
There's
nobody on this world worships anyone. But then, you bring your character to me and you're like, I want to play this paladin. And I'm like, that's super. You start hearing voices and he asks you to worship.
Yeah.
And now you have a character that exists in a world without religion.
Right.
Who has religion. And then has to try and explain that to people and not come off like a lunatic, or try and rationalize his existence and whether or not he's gone crazy, or does religion exist now?
That's like Talos.
Yeah.
Magic doesn't exist. People don't sling spells.
Yeah.
That's not an option. Doesn't mean if you don't come to me and tell me you want to play a wizard that I'm not going to work you in. and like work with you to describe what is magic to you. How are you casting these spells? What does it look like?
Yeah.
How did you spend your whole life coming up with like scientific concoctions to like create a bolt of fire that you can summon somehow and no one else knows how you're doing it? Maybe that's something we'd have to talk about.
Yeah.
But out the gate, I would tell you during character creation, just a heads up, gods walk amongst men and magic doesn't exist. And then you go, oh, dang.
Well, that changes things because this sheet says sorcerer.
Yeah. And I'm like, we can work with that. You know what I mean? Like let's figure this out together. And maybe that's really fun. Or maybe you're like, ooh, that's not worth it. Maybe that's not the direction I want to go in that world. Like, oh, this world doesn't have magic inherently. Like, maybe I want to be a monk for this one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, maybe it changes your perspective.
Maybe it changes your perspective of the thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
but yeah, the most important thing when it comes to world building is to, like we said before when we were talking about it, is build the world that you want to play in.
yes.
Right. So
Don't build this for your players. Build it for you first.
Yeah, build it for you first, because otherwise it's going to become a chore and it's going to be something that is going to show in your work.
Yep.
Right. So if you enjoy the source material that you're working with and what you're creating, your players are going to enjoy it too.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Because it's going to show, like that whole thing, you know, like I'm cooking with love.
Yeah.
You're world building with love.
Yeah.
And if you don't enjoy it, like I said, it's going to show up in your work. And if you do enjoy it, then it's going to make it that much easier for you to flesh everything out and come up with a really believable place for your players to exist that's going to be fun for everybody. So having fun with it is like the most important thing, because that's why you're doing this.
Yeah.
You're doing this to have fun and to flex your creative muscle in your brain pan, right?
Especially if this is a table of close friends that you've been playing with and you're all already on the same page anyway. Of course, you know, as always, do your session zeros and things like that. Though this would be a fantastic example in time to do your session zero campaigns. Get a few session zeros in there and really build this world together. Ooh,
yeah, then you're really building a world.
Yep.
Yeah.
That was what I would do.
Which
100%.
at that point, your world building becomes a collaborative effort,
Yes.
which is even better.
This is your world as a group. Oh, God, chef's kiss. But for now, I've been Tyler.
And I've been Richard.
And we've been
True Strike.
Hey, adventurers. Thanks again for joining us today. Please be sure to give us a follow on your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. If there's any questions you'd like to write into the show, you can hit us up on Twitter or Instagram. New episodes release every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern. Thank you for listening to True Strike.